Hi, good afternoon. I'm Trey Reckling, the founder and director of Academy of Cannabis Science, and we're very glad that you joined us today for Saturday Sesh. Saturday Sesh is what we do the first Saturday of every month, and we've been doing this since just before the pandemic, and it's a great opportunity for us to welcome our cannabis fam in to talk about a variety of things, whether it be cultivation, professionalism, getting a job in the space, the civil rights issues that are all intricately intertwined in this space, medical cannabis, you name it. So we're really glad that you joined us. Today, we're especially proud to announce that we have Caitlein Ryan as our guest. Caitlein, and let me go to my notes. Caitlein is the founder of Sound Cultivation, a cannabis policy consulting solution in Washington State. She has a PhD from Arizona State, where she focused on arts education, curriculum, and assessment, qualitative research, and social justice. When Washington passed ballot measure I-502 legalizing adult use cannabis, she became an early licensee and stakeholder in the new emerging market. In this new role, she applied her experience in arts education advocacy to the cannabis industry, which is very interesting. She's a founding member and first president of the Central Washington Growers Association, which focuses on community engagement and local government in Central Washington. She is also the president and interim executive director for the Cannabis Alliance, a member-driven cannabis industry association dedicated to the advancement of a vital, ethical, and sustainable cannabis industry. Wow, you're busy. Welcome, Caitlein. How you doing?
Good. Thanks, Trey, for having me here today. I'm excited.
No, we're so excited to have you on, and I don't know how you do all the stuff that you do.
Well, when it's listed like that, it kind of feels like a lot, but I'm passionate, and that helps make it not feel like work a lot, you know.
Well, and of course, it doesn't happen all at once. So
Right.
let's take a step back and talk about like why cannabis. At what point did you go, I think I should have some participation in that?
Yeah, well, first of all, I always say, the first half of my career was in theater and arts education. And I always like to say that the cannabis world is kind of the same bunch of weirdos that I worked with in the theater universe. And so while it's kind of a stretch of a jump, it actually in my mind isn't in a lot of ways, because and the advocacy work is very similar. But I think like a lot of people talked here, I had an event that really changed the course of things. And that was my mom was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer at age 57. And that was maybe about 4 years before I-502 passed. And so we were right in the thick of her care. And, we actually got a lot of time with her before she ended up passing. We had about 6 years of time. And a lot of that was healthy time too, which was great. But it was a big challenge to, especially, with pancreatic cancer. It's a lot of, I think it's changed in the last 7 or so years, but you know that it's going to end at some point once you get that diagnosis. It's a tough one, and so that anxiety that goes along with end of life, and then it's your digestive system. So eating is a big challenge the entire time, and just the struggle we went through. She lived in Arizona, and the struggle we went through just to get her even a medical card and get her through the stigma of going to a retail or to a dispensary and finding medicine that worked for her and getting her doctors on board with it. And even at that time, Phoenix is kind of a hotbed for cancer research. And, we had the leading pancreatic cancer specialist in the country just because he happened to be 2 blocks from where she lived. And, he was aware of the research emerging, but still was kind of not, just didn't know how to give us any advice on what to do. And then she spent a lot of time in hospitals, and in the hospital there was no access at all. They did offer her Marinol, but even at that time her doctor was saying, Marinol's not going to give you what you're looking for. And so that then was in the backdrop of the conversation here in Washington of legalization. And I was really taken by the concept of a brand new industry and the opportunities that presents for women, social justice, corporate stewardship, the idea that if we could build an entire industry on different values than what our traditional corporate structure looks like, was really exciting to me. And so kind of combining those two things, I decided with some friends to seek a license in that first round of licensing, and then ended up with a license for growing in Chelan County, which is central Washington here in Washington State. And we got our license completed. So here in Washington, you get approved for a license, and then you have to do your entire build out. You have to have your location, your fences up, your security up, everything but the plants. And then your background checks, your financial records, like the amount of paperwork that is submitted is significant. And then you get your license handed to you. So you have your approval, and then months later, sometimes for some folks, a year plus later, then your license is granted and complete. And we completed our license one day before Chelan County passed a ban on all growing. So then I became politically active.
Well, and for great reasons. And people don't understand the huge investment and kind of wish on a star that is for some licensees or aspiring licensees who, like you said, not just the money, but all the time you put in before they close the door. And people don't understand how those local restrictions impact people,
Yeah. And even 7 years later, we just finally got a court decision back in October that we're allowed to stay at our location. That was just October of this year. So, and it's going to continue to be an ongoing battle for the most part. Legal adult use legalization has not meant the end of prohibition, for sure. And I think that's a battle that's going to continue for quite some time, unnecessarily.
So not everybody on the call, or not everybody who watches this, will be involved in growing or interested in growing. But they're obviously interested in cannabis in some way, either as a patient or some other. Help us understand what you had to learn about advocacy groups, about groups like the Cannabis Alliance. What didn't you know going in?
I mean, what did I know? It's probably the better way to put it. I'll be honest, like, I enjoyed cannabis, but that I had not ever grown before. And so I was more on the investor side of that process, and the startup side, not so much the growing side. That was one of my partners. That's what he brought to the table. And so everything from zoning laws to agricultural laws to how the interaction between municipalities versus the state versus cities versus counties, all of those how all those decisions get made, a lot of just legal education about what can you sue the government for, because, by the way, it's not just because you're angry. You have to actually have a claim for damages of some kind, and learned quite a lot about that. And then just from the business side of things, we were one of those groups of owners that was fully self-funded, because you can't get a loan at all. And in Washington State, especially at the time, there was no out-of-state funding, so we couldn't go seek investors from anywhere else. And so it was completely self-funded. And so it was quite the crash course in just business ownership 101 in general, and how to put together good partnerships. And unfortunately, I had to learn the hard way in a lot of ways, and ended up with not a great partnership for a lot of us. And so, that's been a rocky road and continues to be a rocky road a little bit. And then as I got involved in it, and then especially also on the patient side of things, I had a little bit more background in that. I also have a couple of kids who are special needs. And then, having been through things with my mom, I knew how to advocate in the medical system. But then when you add cannabis into it, there's the stigma really is a true real thing, because you can be advocating for yourself as a patient or for somebody else as a patient, and there is an understanding of that advocacy and sort of almost even a heroizing of it, like, good for you, the system's broken, keep working hard, keep doing your thing. And then you throw cannabis in there and suddenly those friendly faces change and disappear. And then it gets a lot harder and opportunities go away. And so relearning how to navigate a system I thought I knew how to navigate pretty well, but then how to do it now with cannabis became a completely different animal.
No, you described that really well, and it sounds incredibly frustrating. And I know as a patient who had the benefit of kind of walking into a state when we moved here that already had 20 years of medical use plus, I had great advantages, kind of sitting on the shoulders of giants and patients who've been there before and advocating and allowing us to be to the place we are now. But do you have any regular advice that you give people who are just getting started, who may have no idea about the road ahead of them, even though, we've got a pretty good, clear path now? Do you give any newbies advice when it comes to advocacy?
Keep showing up. And I'm here to talk about the Cannabis Alliance. And I actually truly in my heart, not just because that's where my work is, but my work is here because I do truly believe in, man, that was a hard sentence to get out. Sorry. I do truly believe in the work that the Cannabis Alliance does. Because we have such a broad umbrella and we cover a lot of different areas of advocacy. And I find that becoming an advocate is best started at what you're passionate about, what hits you in your heart. And then any opportunity, just show up. It can feel a little awkward sometimes, especially if you're new, but I will say that just like the same bunch of weirdos as theater, it's also probably the most welcoming group of folks. I have never had a circumstance where, I've seen something online and I've decided to just go ahead and go and find out what's going on. And then by the end, I've got a couple of leads. I've had a few conversations. I've been invited to join in because we really do need all the hands we can get here. There's plenty of work to be done. And then by showing up, I get to meet really amazing people who are doing extraordinary things. And then just that network starts to build. And next thing you know, you're meeting with legislators and sitting in on LCB meetings and you're plugged in. And so always my advice to newbies is just start showing up and then keep showing up. And you will find you probably have more work than you have time for in pretty short order.
No, and I agree. I knew one person in town when we moved here, one, and I didn't have a job. My husband had a job, but I thought, I was going to have to reinvent myself and become a grower. And I had all these assumptions about what the cannabis industry was. But from day one, I've had, I was welcomed with open arms. At that time, it was the Washington Marijuana Association, which was one of 4 or 5 organizations that came together to form the alliance. But, even when that evolution happened, people just continued to be engaging and welcoming. So I'm glad you mentioned that, because some people are either at the entry level in this industry, or they're like, people say things like, well, I'm just a patient. I don't have a license or anything. Why would I go to an alliance meeting? Because I'm gonna feel like a kid at a middle school dance. I won't know anybody and I won't be asked to dance, kind of thing. So set us straight on that. Is that the case?
Never, no. And I will say this, to be honest, especially now 7 years later, we're kind of tired of our echo chamber in terms of licensees and business owners. We've all been talking to each other pretty closely now for quite some time. And unfortunately, what has gotten lost a lot are those patient voices, those bud tender voices, and frankly, just consumers who are concerned about what's happening around the industry, because maybe we've been in that echo chamber a little bit. And so I will say, if you show up and that's how you identify, probably my guess is like 4 people will be right at your face, ready to go. Say, tell me more about that. Where are you from? What are you interested in? Do you have any questions? It's a necessary part of the conversation, and it's where this conversation started, especially with patients. None of us would be here in this adult use market if it wasn't for patients and patient advocacy. And frankly, I believe that the success of adult use is going to be 100% beholden to how well we continue to advocate for patients in medical use moving forward. That's the first and foremost. And if that is cared for, then the rest will follow, certainly.
Absolutely. And you're not making me cry, but my eyes are watering today. So, but I'd tell you if you were making me cry. So you mentioned patients, and we know there are so many more patients in existence in practice than there are on the books, right? If you looked at the number of patients in Washington State before and after 502 came on, just like happens in every other state, the number drops precipitously because people are like, well, some people feel like I don't need my paperwork anymore. I'll just go find what I need to find at a store. And sometimes you can, but you can't always get advice. You can't always get good professional consultant level advice from people. So I'm glad you mentioned that, because absolutely, we have to consider patients and people who don't consider themselves patients. But we got to remember, in some ways, like Tommy Chong says, all cannabis use could be considered medical, because people are taking it to reduce stress, to sleep, to help with their appetite, all these things that are medical concerns, but they still might not consider themselves a patient. And but kudos to the people who are in the alliance, and people like Stephen Field, who's on the call today, who participate in the patient committee. So if people want to come and participate at that level too, you don't have to have experience. We have people who have great levels, many years experience in advocacy, and other people who just have a passion for it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and so with the Alliance, you can end up like really in it and doing things all day, every day if you kind of want. But yeah, Stephen's a great example. Or Taylor, you might know Don Guzman from your sister store. We see him a lot on our happy hours. So we have happy hours on Tuesday afternoons, and by and large, that's not licensees. I'll invite one every so often because it kind of helps conversation get a little interesting that way. But by and large, it's consumers, bud tenders, and patients on our happy hour, and has become, especially through pandemic, not only a great place to talk strains and terpene profiles and gadgets and all the cool things that you can do, but also almost, I don't want to say support group because I don't want to make it sound scary in that way, but certainly it's been a touchstone once a week for folks who are in the industry to just check in and see how are we all surviving pandemic. And that that's no experience at all. We've had some folks come on who have even said, I still haven't even tried yet, and I don't know where to go or how to start. And then, as you can imagine, there's a few people on that call then that jump in and go, "Ooh, I can't wait to tell you. I can't wait to answer questions." And
right.
And so that networking piece is really fantastic. But then, we've ended up too with things like we've partnered with HempFest to do neighborhood cleanups, and so we met quite a few folks during that cleanups to celebrate their 30-year anniversary that had never engaged in anything, and then here they're out cleaning up the community to help just make our neighborhoods nicer. Or even some political action. We do lobby days, which is one of the things I want to make sure I plug, because registration for that is open now. And on lobby days, we set up all the meetings with legislators and give you talking points and set you up with a team leader who's done it before, so can kind of coach you through the process. And a lot of times that's half of the lobby days attendees, that's the first time they've ever met with a lawmaker. And it's one of my favorite events because at the end of the day, we always get great feedback about, wow, that was a lot easier. That was really exciting to participate in the process. And it's actually a real joy, because I know we might talk about this, we might not, but on the list of questions was about, did I have to come out of the closet to my family and and the people around me? And the answer is yes. I'll tell you about that in a second. But it can be really freeing to finally just kind of own it and say, hey, this is a thing that's cool. And I'm constantly, we started looking at putting content on TikTok, and of course we have to be very careful about the rules there and cannabis use, and just blown away with how easy it is to show alcohol and talk about alcohol and make jokes about alcohol, and still how scary it can be to claim cannabis as your thing. But but it's also pretty cool and awesome. And then when you get to do it with a crowd of people like you do when you join an organization like the Cannabis Alliance, makes it a lot easier.
And you mentioned lobby days, and I'm glad you did. It was on my list to bring up. So you don't have to have experience. People just need to know when it is to sign up, show up, and then. But what if you don't have any experience? You're going to tell me how to do it? How does that work?
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, truly, you just have to know when it is, sign up and show up, and we will handle the rest of it for you. So we start the day with a training just to kind of go over some do's and don'ts. I was just looking around. I had some of my handouts still from last year that I keep to remind myself of bill numbers, because that can be a challenge for me sometimes. But so we have handouts. This last year, we did it all online, and we're going to be online again. Oh, Jill is the best with the links. Thank you, Jill. She put in the sign up link in the chat if you want to check that out. But so we start the day with a training of kind of general do's and don'ts. And again, you're with a team leader that has already had meetings in the past. And so you've got your handouts. We had electronic PDFs with cool clickable links and everything like that. So you have plenty of written material to go off of, and then also short talking points. And then your team leader will usually start the meeting for you and could potentially do all the talking if you're not quite ready yet. And then we have sort of a little review guide, so that after each meeting, you know how to, you have guidance on what to talk about with each other, about what went well, what didn't go well. Your leaders will have been prepped to say, hey, do you want to take this section next time and give it a try? And then at the end of the day, we all get together with a reception, and we always have a few lawmakers come, where we get to have a lot more casual conversation with them. And then also just networking amongst ourselves and compare notes. How did the day go? What was your meeting with this person like? How did, that one go? And there's always one or two legislators who clearly are not pleased that they had to have a cannabis meeting and say something outrageous that we can all laugh about. And then there's always a couple of surprises of folks that we thought might be that way, but actually ended up being great. And we can share those stories, and you'll feel like an expert at the end of the day if you come in even knowing nothing to start.
So I've heard people say, well, look, it's already legal. What are you fighting for now? Like, the fight is over. Help us understand what are some things that are on the agenda? And I don't want to put you on the spot for specifics, but what are some things worth fighting for this year?
Yeah, absolutely. And the only specific that I'm not going to be able to call out of my head are the bill numbers, because me and numbers are not buddies. But for us, our legislative, there's quite a bit, but the big one is home grow. We still in Washington state do not have adult use home grow. We're the only adult use state in the nation that does not have some version of home grow. There are a few that like us. So if you are registered as a patient, you can grow at home, and there are some pretty strict rules about that. But just for regular adult use, we don't have it. And not only that, but if you are caught and your paperwork is not correct as a registered patient, it is a felony to grow at home. So if you've got one plant in a closet and you haven't completed that process, yeah, you could have a felony on your record if you're arrested. So that one's a huge one. For us, that's a patient access issue. That's a civil rights issue. That's a equity issue. When police have that amount of leeway, it can get really challenging. And then so along those lines, we also have another bill around arrest protection that allows patients who are on the registry the affirmative defense. So it means that the burden of proof is on law enforcement rather than on the individual, because typically what has happened, and I mean, even had a few stories this year from folks who law enforcement came in, destroyed all the plants, arrested, and from prison, they had to then go about, or from jail, they had to go about finding the correct paperwork to prove that no, they were actually allowed to be growing. But of course, by then they lost days at work. There are the fees associated with being in prison that doesn't get refunded. And then their life's been turned upside down and inside out. So arrest protection would prevent that from happening moving forward, and then allow for when, because we know there will be a when that protocol is violated, that then there's basis for going back and seeking damages and removing those fines and fees and things like that. Then additionally, again, from that patient perspective, right now, patients do not pay sales tax, which depending on which city you're in is between like 9 and 13%. But they still do pay the excise tax, which is 37%. By the way, the highest cannabis tax out of any adult use state or medical state in the nation by a lot. I think the next one down is another like 10% below that. So we tax our cannabis really high here. So it's to remove that tax for patients. And we've kind of had to whittle it down to a really narrow slice in order to get legislators to even look at it in terms of the impact on the general budget. But so it will be removing the excise tax for patients buying DOH compliant product. And I'm not sure if you all are familiar. So the Department of Health has a pretty high standard for what DOH compliancy means regarding pesticide and heavy metal testing. Currently, we only have 4 producer processors in the state that make DOH compliant product, a few others that could probably get there in pretty short order. But the hope with that bill is patients should, excise tax is known as a sin tax, right? So patients should not be paying a sin tax on their medicine. Simple. But then also to hopefully start to spur producer processors to grow and create more DOH compliant product and safe product for patients that they can show is safe by kind of dangling that carrot out there. That would be also less expensive medicine for patients. And then finally, but certainly not least, the really big one that we've been working on pretty much since the get-go has been establishing a cannabis research commission. So all commodities in this, not all commodities, most commodities in the state of Washington, have a commission. I'm sure you've seen like the National Beef Council commercials on TV or something like that. So right now, because if it is federally illegal, we are not seeking a marketing order, which means that we'd be able to advertise Washington cannabis as a whole to the rest of the nation. But rather, the other thing commissions do is they do a lot of research. So market research, worker safety research, things like cannabinoids, right? It's been a big conversation in the last year and a half, 2 years or so. So research on what that looks like, as well as just best farming practices, pesticide application, all kinds of things. That is funded by the farmers. And then so once the farmers then decide what kind of research they need as a group, then that research then is distributed to all farmers. It's public knowledge rather than just sort of being in the hands of the 2-3 top folks who have money to burn on research and development. So those are really, really big ones. We're also looking at some legislation around a craft endorsement, which would allow some direct sales from smaller producer processors on their farms, which we think is great. That would go a long way to helping farmers who are in a really tough spot right now.
Yeah, and that's a step closer to the wine tasting model that we've discussed, that has been so successful for mom and pop wine farmers. And so, yeah, what a great opportunity that could be, even without the tasting opportunity, to go and meet the farmers, see what's going on, develop that personal relationship, because we really do need to be able to trust our producer processors, and getting to know them and understand their values is huge. We don't always get that opportunity with other agricultural products. Some do, but would be a great opportunity. So thanks for all of that. And once again, the link is in chat if anybody's interested. As Jill reminds us, and Stephen asked, that it is virtual, so you don't even have to drive to Olympia to participate. So consider doing that. I want to make sure to open the floor. I have dominated your time, and I apologize to everybody on the call. What other questions do you all have for Caitlein? Because I've got more, but
really quickly before we do that though, I do want to just right quick also promote on tomorrow evening, just because we're talking about legislation, we do have a political action committee that helps fund the lobbying that we do in Olympia. And so tomorrow you don't have to pay anything to show up. We would love for you to donate while you're there, but you can come downtown Seattle at the Collective. We've got a fantastic comedy lineup for the evening, and you can come out, have drinks, have snacks, hang out with some like-minded folks and enjoy some comedy. We'd love to see you. And I will put the link in the thing.
Yeah, I was gonna say I was gonna lean on Jill for that if she has an opportunity. But the Collective is a beautiful space. I haven't been there, but I've snooped online, and so I think 4 different female comedians are leading the effort tomorrow night, and so yes, definitely come out and check it out. And if especially if you feel kind of COVID cooped up, it's a great opportunity to come and be with some people and have a moment of levity with everything else that's crazy going around. Besides just the holidays can be crazy, but we hope people will come out and check that out tomorrow night.
Yeah.
What
Thanks
other
for
questions do you all have? Because if you don't, I'm gonna keep rolling. Caitlein, talk to us about coming out to family. We had this conversation, and I know we have people. We have people still that go into retail stores and they won't park anywhere close to the store, or they'll try to park behind the store. They'll go at a time where they'll go to a store outside of their neighborhood, hopefully not to run into a neighbor. But it's kind of, I don't know, it's kind of like people being afraid to go to a gay bar, and they say, well, what if I see somebody? They're like, well, they're there too. What's the problem? But it's still a concern. And we've had 70 plus years of prohibition and propaganda that have really instilled a very serious fear and done a lot of harm on top of that. But how hard was it for you to come out to family and own this, as you say?
I would say to family, not a problem at all. I recall as like a 5-year-old playing in my dad's best friend's basement in the dig out area as they were digging it out for their basement grow. And then one day the dirt pile that we used to play in, we were not allowed to go in there anymore because plants had arrived. So my family was fine. Maybe a little bit my extended family, but really truly not too big of a deal. They're mostly based in California, so I think that's just been a part of culture there for long enough that it wasn't an issue. But in my community, it was a big challenge. I have 4 children, and my husband's a physician, and so there's a positioning there as well. And yeah, I went to lots of soccer games, volunteered at the school, was heavy involved in the PTA. And I say was only because my kids are older now and they would prefer that I stay away, not because I ditched it for this or anything, but that's just their preference. So, but when they were younger, I did all kinds of weird dancing around. People would ask what I was up to. I'd say, oh, I'm involved in a startup. And hopefully that would end the conversation. They'd say, oh, what kind of startup? Oh, agricultural. I'd use all these euphemisms to try and not have to. And then for a while I was kind of saying, well, I'm not sure how you're going to feel about this, but it is the candidate. Here's the thing. And by and large, the responses were not too bad. Occasionally I got a, oh, okay, well, interesting response, but it was more self-inflicted. And then frankly, I'd had an epiphany that as a white woman with economic resources, I owed it to everybody else to stand tall and stand proud and speak my truth, because the amount of repercussions I'm going to face compared to a lot of other folks who have been involved in legacy for a long time, I have the power and resources to fight any legal action or child protective services, which is the one that I always worried the most about. And so I promised myself I was going to stop doing that. I was going to stop being euphemistic about it, and I was going to just own it. And it's been great ever since. I've had a few detractors. My middle schooler wore my Hemp Fest hoodie to school one day, and I missed that at the door. So there's that. And I've signed into teacher conferences accidentally as the Cannabis Alliance multiple times. Actually, when we were online, my kids occasionally would use my computer at the end of a quarter. They get a new password, and then so they'd sign into their class Zoom as the Cannabis Alliance. So I've had a few phone calls with the school district who then blocked our IP address because they thought we were Zoom bombing. And I said, no, that's my job. And that's just my kid trying to do their thing. But the school hasn't, like I said, there's always like a few of those kinds of folks, but beyond just an attitude, it's been pretty awesome and freeing.
And we've talked about you as a professional, but you also as a mom, which you bring up. How do you strike that balance, if you don't mind me asking, between helping your kids understand, no, this is good, viable, beneficial medicine for a lot of people, and there are limits to what there are limits to ways you can go and talk to your friends about this because it could impact us negatively. I mean, how do you strike that balance with them?
Yeah, as far as it's so interesting how really in effect prohibitionist ideology still is, right? Because my kids, I've never had to ask them to kind of keep what I do a little bit private or be circumspect about the way they talk about it with others, because they themselves have always, and this kind of sucks, but have been a little embarrassed about what I do because they have gotten the message at school that say no to drugs, drugs are bad, and weed is a drug.
Mm-hmm.
It's that simple. And so they already understand very keenly how the rest of society views cannabis. And so they have self-censored in a lot of ways. And then, the way we talk about it at home, and actually one of my kids came up with this analogy, which I loved. And, it's just telling them that like anything, like sex, like alcohol, there's just lots of things that are really fun and awesome when you're an adult, but until you're an adult, it actually can cause damage and your brain is still cooking. And as long as it's still cooking, if you change that temperature at all or moisture in the oven, your brain grows differently, and that can have an impact on things later in life. And then so one of my kids, they're like, oh, like those trees where the wind is blowing on it all the time and then the tree grows sideways. And I was like, exactly. So you don't want your tree to grow sideways. So don't put things into your mind and body that's going to make your tree grow sideways. With then the caveat, because one of my children does have a seizure disorder, with the caveat that this is medicine, and like all medicines, you have to make decisions about the impact that it's going to have both positively and negatively. There is no medicine out there that doesn't have some negative impact when you take it. And there are lots of kids that really rely heavily on cannabis as a medicine. And my kiddo was one of them. He's not currently, but we have been registered on the registry and have used cannabis as a way to manage his seizures. Unfortunately, he's got a really weird diagnosis, and I use that with it. I agree. We agree together that it is a weird one because it's been really challenging to find good therapy for him. But but I use that as an example. The pharmaceutical that he's prescribed, we have to do blood tests every 6 months to check impact on his liver, right? Versus any impact that cannabis might have on his development, to me, pales in comparison to maybe needing new organs at some point in his life because of the drugs that he takes.
Wow.
Yeah. And we have that very open, caring, loving conversation, and sometimes the kids will walk in after I've tried rolling some joints and, they'll walk into my room like, oh man, mom, it smells like cannabis in here. I'm like, yeah, it does. I've been rolling some joints. And, I used to be pretty open about it. And they actually asked, they're like, if you could just kind of do that on your own time and not when we're around, we'd appreciate it. Like, okay. And again, that embarrassment that they've sort of picked up from the world around them. But then also, my 9-year-old recently came in and he goes, Mom, did you know that cannabis can cure cancer? It's like, I kind of did, but how do you know that? And so they had just watched some TikTok about medicine plants and then went down a rabbit hole of YouTube videos and a few other things. And then he wanted to have a big, long conversation about it. So,
yeah, my niece just said, we were just watching this thing on crack cocaine. Did you realize that the penalties for crack cocaine were so different because of, and anyway, she gave me this whole racial breakdown of the law. And I was like, where'd you learn that? And it was, I think, initiated on TikTok and somewhere else, but
man, and these kids, I swear they give me all the hope in the universe because they have access to stuff like this. And I, a lot of times half of our conversations are not initiated by me, but by them because they, watch something. Yeah. Same thing about arrest rates and imprisonment here in the US. And, my daughter, one of my other kiddos, came to me and she's like, did you know we have the highest rates of incarceration? And I said, yeah. And then I went on to do my professor thing. And she goes, Mom, ease up.
But I think it's really exciting. You talk about your kids, but there's so many kids that will grow up with a different perspective. And so when they're teenagers or however old and somebody pulls out a joint at a party or whatever, it's not like, ooh, what you got? It's like, oh yeah, you got weed. It gives them more information on which to base a decision, right? And it, because when we keep it hidden and hidden away, then they're just relying on whatever nugget of knowledge they might have about something. So I think, one of the ways we can protect kids is by educating them, just like
Absolutely.
you're doing. And so
Yeah.
kudos as a parent and as a professional and as an advocacy professional. Um, if we want to protect them, we help them understand the dangers, the real risks, trees growing sideways or whatever analogy you use. Um, so that when it comes time for them to make a decision when we're not around or you're not around, then they've got, they're working with more info. So
Yeah, I learned this lesson just because I had too many kids and stairs in my house. And so learned a lot pretty early on that the best way to protect kids on the stairs is to teach them how to slide down on their tummies. So by my fourth one at 9 months, he knew that when he got to the top of the stairs, he turned around on his tummy and would fly down those stairs. And that's how, because I just could not watch all of those children all the time and that way without gates and anyways, all kinds of rigmarole. And so that in general is just sort of a good lesson of, the appropriate, developmentally appropriate lessons and how to keep themselves safe is actually the best.
And just a reminder that we're all educators, whether you're a college professor or you're meeting with somebody in Olympia or you have a neighbor who has a condition that cannabis might have a beneficial effect for, but they don't. We all have the opportunity to light small fires, and those small fires are huge. We would ask you to resist the urge to go, to try to convert somebody or have them think the way you think all at once, but give people a little bit of knowledge and come back, check up on it, engage them in a way that's loving and compassionate rather than combative. And so much good can be done. And I know the people on this call know that, but just a reminder, I was very frustrated at some point about, it was a whole nother issue. And I was working with this woman who was really smarter than me. And she said, look, just light small fires and move on, do what you can do. It's that seed of knowledge, and and nobody feels attacked. So remember, everybody on this call knows more about cannabis than the general public, and so don't underestimate your power and influence. You don't have to be sitting at the front of the room to teach, and so please teach. And Michaela, thanks. Love being able to hear everybody's story and hear everybody's advocating for this beautiful medicinal plant. And that's what urged me to say that. So thank you, Michaela. And thank you, Caitlein. Thanks for sharing with us and taking your time. We really appreciate all the work that you do, not just for this industry in this state, but all the effects, the ripple effects, because the Cannabis Alliance gets turned to by other professional organizations, by lawmakers well outside of Washington. And you all are lighting big and small fires. So thanks for all the work you do with the Alliance and beyond.
Well, thank you. And before we go, if it's okay, I just want to kind of lay out like all of the ways we have committees are a great way to get involved at a low stakes sort of level. The meetings can a couple of times like once a month, maybe sometimes once every couple of months. They're smaller groups, so you don't have to, walk into a full room full of people. It's a Zoom like this one with just a few folks usually. And we cover everything from sustainability and have had lots of big impacts environmentally through our sustainability committee. Trey heads up the education committee, and we've had extraordinary education outreach from the education committee. We've got community outreach, which is a little bit different, and that's plugging into communities to show we're not quite so scary as maybe we've been made out to be. Also equity and justice. So if that's of concern, we do a lot of partnering with Last Prisoner Project and Civil Survival. We've been working on an expungement project, and now we're kind of moving into an education phase, which is really exciting. Patient Caucus, which is like Trey pointed out, Stephen's a part of, and a lot of legislative and regulatory work there because, again, patients are getting squeezed a lot within this industry, and so there's lots of places where repair needs to be done. I'm trying to think if I missed anything. Legislative work. Jill, can you think of? Am I skipping a committee or two?
I think that just about covers it, actually. Okay. I will post a link to our committee's page in the chat, though. So you guys can go and check out and sign up if you want.
Thank you. And like I said, the Alliance has been incredibly generous by offering our students not only to attend, but has created a special student category for membership. So we encourage you, you don't have to be a member to show up, but being a member helps support the organization because the Alliance doesn't receive big bucks from from donors, like huge Nabisco is not on the, not donating money to the Alliance. This is a small nonprofit, small but powerful and influential nonprofit, but it does take money to make the operation run. So if you're interested in membership, there is a special student rate. So kudos and thanks to the Alliance for always making our students feel welcome and offering not only to let us join the monthly meetings, but the happy hours, as you mentioned, the happy hours are every Tuesday from 4 to 5. So, so thank you again.
Yeah, and for happy hour, by the way, you don't have to show up at 4. You can pop in and pop out at any. It truly is a happy hour. Anytime is good. And a lot of you talked about opiate use, and I will say this: that is one of the big initiatives that we are kind of gearing up for, and that is engagement with our medical community, and so education to medical professionals. And then specifically, we've got a few folks who are just in the really early stages of trying to figure out how to get that education out there, share stories about cannabis as a mitigation for opiate addiction, and even prescribing in the first place, like Dr. Uma talks about.
And one of our students has just taken over as co-lead of the education committee. So step up. We'd love to have you all. You don't have to live in Washington State either. So for those of you on the call from Las Vegas and beyond, thanks again, Caitlein. We appreciate you. We love you. We hope that everybody will consider going to this event tomorrow night if you're anywhere in the area. And Jill has posted a link there. Once again, it's thecannabisalliance.us. And thank you so much for your time. Thank you, everybody, for sharing your time with us today and being on Saturday Sesh next month. We won't have it on the first Saturday because the first Saturday of January is the 1st. And we know we're not going to compete with the 1st. But the 8th, which is the second Saturday, we're going to have Dr. Allison Drayson from Ames Institute, who not only is the lead psychotherapist, but leads people through cannabis therapy and entheogen therapy. She leads their ketamine-assisted therapy program and is incredibly knowledgeable when it comes to entheogens or psychedelics. And so we're really excited about that conversation too. So come back and join us January 8th. If you got this message, you'll get that one too. And always check us out on Facebook, where we post these events. And like I mentioned before, YouTube for our library of offerings. Thank you all. Have a great rest of your Saturday, and we'll see you soon.